So when Philip first came into being, I wanted to write about how a jack-o'-lantern would handle the pressure of being unemployed for most of the year. Ultimately, I decided that he didn't handle it, and instead got roughed up by a couple of nasty addictions. Either way, the storyline required that I tackle a couple of interesting technical challenges, primarily facial animation and compositing onto live video. After developing Philip himself, I wrote a small 5-minute script involving his attempt to mend a friendship damaged while he was focusing all of his time on prescription pain medication. He would be sitting on a bench expounding on what went wrong and what he could have done better. At the UK Arboretum, where I was planning on shooting, I found the exact bench that I wanted, and with the help of Debi, carefully measured the exact distances and redrew it on paper and finally in the computer. Now I had the bench that is at the Arboretum, now a complete duplicate model on my computer at home. This was originally planned for the shadows, but also I quickly realized another advantage that it created for me. Originally I had planned to storyboard everything by hand, drawing out all the camera angles, but by simply adding a biped to my scene, which would stand in for Josh, before I even went to the set, I was able to explore different camera angles so that ultimately I could make broad decisions on how I was going to set up every individual shot and not have to make those decisions on the set. This saved a lot of time for everybody involved and provided another tool which I hadn't originally planned on using. I had to have actual physical markers on the scene. I created a group of adhesive dots by hole punching some black electrical tape against a 3x5 card. These provided little stickers that I would place throughout the bench and eventually would match up with the computer. After completing shooting, I used Sonic Foundry's Vegas to edit my entire piece and treated it as though Phillip were already there. I now had a series of AVI files which would ultimately contain Phillip. These were loaded into 3D Studio Max's camera tracking utility where individual markers would be placed to follow the adhesive dots on the video. Oftentimes these didn't work or were untrackable, so I had to find a unique geometric point such as a corner. Either way, these were all tracked through the entire frame set of this animation, and I ended up with a group of points which would then be matched to a new camera. I ended up with a camera that now moved exactly as though mine had in the real world. So once this computer-generated scene was placed on top of the original video, you had a perfect sync between these two perspectives, and this provided a framework for all of my animation. After selecting the appropriate camera and time range for the segment I was going to animate, I could then move on to Phillip. Phillip was composed of 3 animation modifiers: bend and twist, which would provide his basic head motion. I would go through once and animate this in one pass, then I'd have a basic idea of how his emotions were kind of coming through. After I did this, I would go into Morpher. Morpher uses a series of pre-created facial shapes which are then animated from one to another for a particular shot, so then this provided a method of lip-syncing Phillip. Similarly to how I did his head motion, I also did his lip sync in passes, so that I'd go through once and do all of the jaw drops for his main syllables, and then I would go back through and get more specific with O's and M's or whatever else was needed. I did most of my animating in the timeline, and animating just one curve made it very easy to go through this whole process in an iterative method. Had I not, I would have been left with pretty much a nest of curves which would have been almost impossible to distinguish from one mouth shape to another. I now had a good animation procedure.
For the time being, I guess. For the time being, I guess. For the time being, I guess. For the time being, I guess.
I added a matte material to the bench, so the bench itself wouldn't render, but once I rendered out my final animation, Phillip would cast a shadow that I would be able to composite onto top of the video. The final rendered sequence was then brought back into Vegas, where I was able to place it directly on top of the existing segment from which I originally tracked the scene. Phillip ended up being a sort of high contrast orange, so I wanted to go in and bring that down a little bit and as well make his highlights a little bit more blue, which is kind of what the light was like on that day. So it ended up being a much better match than the original composite. I'm very happy with the results so far, especially with having developed an approachable method of animating and the camera tracking. Here is a sample of what I've done so far.
I hadn't seen your mom in about 3 years. She doesn't know about me leaving school and rehab and all that, does she? I mean, she asked me if I was thinking about doing something new.
I told her when you left school, but she doesn't know why. Dad knows, but he's not going to tell her.
Oh, your dad knows. Yeah, he gave me a look, but he's been giving me a look ever since we started hanging out, so I didn't know what to think.
He likes to do that. Just give him a response. It makes him feel good.
Yeah, nowadays I think the city is infected with people who give me that look.
Yep. Hey, you're looking kind of thinner, Phil. Do you have a place to run in there?
Run? Oh man, I didn't do any running. Didn't do any running, didn't do any eating. I did some puking.
But you're better now, right?
For the time being, I guess.